Hello, everyone. This is the beginning of a fairly short presentation on managing differences that I'm relating to specifically your Myers-Briggs results. So I'm going to be talking a bit with you about personal and team implications and what your Myers-Briggs results actually mean so you can interpret them properly. I also highly recommend that you utilize what appear to be online credible resources around the Myers-Briggs. Because there's so much out there that's really interesting on implications of your Myers-Briggs for career choices, relationships, parenting, that could be informative for you. So let's go ahead and get started. How to and not to think about your MBTI results. So first of all, realize that what this is telling you is that you have 4 primary dimensions that are being measured, 8 different preferences. And what this is telling you is that you prefer behaving in certain ways based on your Myers-Briggs results. But you don't want to consider this, to go to the very bottom, to be the only way of measuring who you are. It's clear we're very complex people, and any survey that you take will only capture a certain facet of your personality or certain facets. You should know that there are other means of measurement, including the Big Five. Of the 2, the Big Five has more dimensions, and you should also know that the Myers-Briggs has a little bit more problems with reliability, meaning that you could take it at one point in time and the results could shift a bit. What I have found, though, in my own experience with the instrument and the people that I've interfaced with and talked to about it, is that, yes, you could shift because you might have a slight preference in one direction or another. But what's unlikely is that you would entirely shift. So if you had a very strong preference for extroversion, it is unlikely that you're going to shift to having a preference for introversion. If you are very strong in the judging category, you are not likely to shift over into the perceiver category. So there is some degree of sense of coherence over time, but from the studies we know, you can shift a bit in your personality. Now, to be sure, this is 8 dimensions: the extroversion, introversion, intuitive sensor, thinking, feeling, and judging, perceiving. You will have on each one of those a, quote, preference that would arguably predict your behavior in many circumstances. So what we're going to do is, as I talk this through, we're going to talk about my friend Joanna. Now, her profile is an INFJ, and the numbers associated with her preferences are 67, 33, 11, and 78. So 4 different numbers corresponding with 4 different preferences. As the example, 78 refers to her judging preference. And to be sure, a lot of people take this and think, oh my gosh, I'm not judgmental. That's what this is saying about me. It is actually not. The judging, perceiving dimension does not refer to whether someone is judgmental or not. But among them, she has the strongest preference for judging behavior, and the weakest preference for the feeling versus the thinking. So the higher the number and the closer it gets to 100, the more likely you are to have a strong preference to behave that way. If you have a 1 on something, a 5, a 10, a 17, you actually have more of a slight preference, which means in the case of her feeling, there are many experiences where she thinks both with her heart and the deeply held principles she has, as well as with her head in making decisions. So you're kind of on the fence, so to speak. Now, Joanna, this means she is an introverted, intuitive, feeler, judger. There are 16 combinations. Now, let me go into each one of these, and then we'll talk about how Joanna might act as we talk it through. So the introversion extroversion dimension really predicts how we handle energy. And extroverts tend to be stimulated by people and things in the external environment, while introverts tend to be re-stimulated or energized by consolidating within themselves, by having more alone time, time with 1 or 2 very close others, but generally they reconsolidate by being by themselves. And people tend to look to keep their energy consistent throughout the day and their lives. So as one example, an extrovert, when he or she is feeling unenergized, would seek out other people to re-energize. While an introvert, if his or her battery was low, would tend to want to be alone or with somebody else. So I was just, for example, with a group of women who went through a leadership development program, and one of the introverts said, "Oh my goodness, I went through this program and was there from 8 in the morning till 6 at night and was asked to go to dinner, and I absolutely did not want to go to that dinner." She said, "I just wanted to go back to my hotel room and relax." So where you get your energy, is it outside of you or inside of you? How do you recharge your batteries? In addition, there's studies on the brain that show that extroverts and introverts' brains operate differently, such that if an extrovert is presented with a stimulus, it is the extrovert's talking part of the brain acts slightly before the thinking part. So the phrase, "I only think when I hear what I say," applies to extroverts. Whereas with introverts, the thinking part of the brain, quote, lights up or responds slightly before the talking part, which is why extroverts, if you ask them a question, may give you a pregnant pause and then a very coherent answer, versus an extrovert might accidentally interrupt you and end up, circling around ideas and thinking them through aloud. So as you can imagine, in some ways that privileges each one of them in different ways. The extrovert is privileged by the fact that he or she is most likely to raise his or her hand in a meeting first and, gain the spotlight and be vocal at a meeting, whereas the introvert is likely to say something more coherent because of the pregnant pause. Now, in the general populace in the United States, there are more extroverts than introverts. However, what we do know is that there's actually a category of people that are called ambiverts, so kind of between, slight in both directions or sort of moderately in both directions, such that about 2/3 of people are kind of in the middle, and then you get your extreme extroverts and extreme introverts, so you can watch for that within the context of the people you're around. Now, to give you, again, some visuals on this, extroverts tend to be energized by other people, external experiences, and they rely on the environment for stimulation. They can seem to be action-oriented because that's where they're going out and interacting and gaining stimulation, and they do tend to enjoy social situations and relationships. And by that, it means on a larger scale. So if you looked at the social networks between an extrovert and an introvert, it would be the extrovert who would probably have the larger social circle, but the relationships wouldn't be quite as deep. Now, that doesn't mean also that introverts are not socially skillful. They can be absolutely equally as socially skilled as an extrovert. So this is not a measure of social skill or emotional intelligence. The introvert can still be highly relationship oriented. They would tend to have fewer friends that are actually deeper. So they tend to be energized by the internal world of ideas and thoughts. They have more of a principled way about them and are very contemplative and thoughtful, and they do not mind the solitude and privacy. Here are some of the other ways to look at this. Now, notably, I would draw your attention to the last bullet, which is where conflict can happen between the two that can be managed. There are multiple points of conflict, but extroverts can seem shallow to introverts, and introverts can seem withdrawn to extroverts. So you just have to realize this about the people around you. I am aware of years ago when I first started teaching at Cal Poly in California, one of my students said, an undergrad said, having heard this conversation, I'm kind of blown away because I always thought that my roommate was just boring because he didn't want to go out at the end of the day. And now what I'm seeing is he was actually probably just an introvert, and I shut him out thinking that he was not exciting enough to be around. But in fact, it was just him reconsolidating and gaining energy. Okay. Oh, and Joanna, as an introvert, therefore, would probably have a smaller social circle. When she spoke, she would probably be highly coherent. She would need a moment to think through her ideas. and she would tend to be very thoughtful, contemplative, principle-oriented, and might have a harder time getting in big meetings when extroverts would draw the conversation accidentally toward themselves. Now, Joanna also is an intuitive. This is the sensing intuitive dimension. And what I'll do is I'm going to create 2 videos on this. So I'll show the sensing intuitive and then create another video. Now, sensing people, if you think about the word sensing, this has to do with how people process information, either in the abstract by drawing broad categories and associations, or by the very observant details around us. So in the spirit of the word sensing, sensing types are very drawn to what they observe through the 5 senses. So they are very realistic, practical, they notice the details, they're observant, and they like facts. They do like communication that's literal and concrete, and they focus on pulling apart things or pieces, parts of things. When you think about in the world of students, a sensor who's very strongly sensing would be very attuned to the details of the syllabus and the assignments. And sensors, in the spirit of where conflict can occur, can seem too detail-oriented and literal-minded to intuitives. Now, intuitives, on the other hand, are very abstract, theoretical, conceptual thinkers. They look at an object, for example, and they think associations. I used to use an in-class exercise where I would give everybody a baseball, and I would say, tell me everything that comes to your mind as you describe the baseball. Sensors focused on the ball as they saw it. So the red lines, the leatheriness, how hard it was, how it felt when it bounced, what was written on it, whereas intuitives just mostly spent the time associating with baseball. And, last time they went to the baseball game, who won, the hot dog they ate, whether they liked the team, but it was less about the ball. Now, intuitives, thus, as I'm signaling, have an imaginative, theoretical orientation. They like the big pictures and patterns. They don't mind communication that is more abstract and more figurative. They are very good at thinking of patterns and relationships. They can seem fickle or impractical, the sensors, because in the world of ideas, intuitives often have a lot of ideas, but it may well be that they haven't thought through all of the details associated with their aspirations. Now, Joanna, as an intuitive, let's just go back to Dear Joanna, is a 33% intuitive, which means that she does tend to be more abstract as a thinker, pattern-oriented, less detail-oriented, and again, we've already discussed the intuitive in the introverted side of her. And so on her end, here's what I want you to do as we end this part of the video, is think about yourself. You have strengths and weaknesses associated with your personality. And so, if you're an introvert, a strength is that you are more coherent when you speak. And as an intuitive, you are very good at, say, brainstorming and thinking big picture. But that also suggests that there are weaknesses that you may have to attend to and ways of interacting with others if they are different from you that you have to know how to navigate. I will move on to the latter 2 dimensions in the next video.